From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
U.S. government warns hospitals of hackers targeting IT help desks. CISO breach exposes customers to potential supply chain attack, and financial firms lose $12 billion to cyber attacks in 2 decades. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and expertise from our guest, Mike Levin, the Deputy CISO over at 3M. Mike, you're a busy guy. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for joining us.
Always happy to talk cybersecurity with a friend.
All right, before we jump into the stories, a lot to get to today. Just want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor for today, Vanta, compliance that doesn't suck too much. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOSeries.com, hit the events drop down, and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Weekend Review image. Click on it, and you can join us. While you're there, be sure you're contributing in our chat. We've got our regulars in there. We're going to be having some comments in during the course of the show. I cannot wait to see what you're thinking about the show, what questions that you have, comments, perhaps even some snarky comments. Who knows? Very unusual in the cybersecurity community for any kind of snark, but stranger things have happened. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump right into it. First up here, U.S. government warns hospitals of hackers targeting IT help desks. This warning comes from the Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center and states that attackers are using social engineering tactics to target IT help desks across the healthcare and public health sector. This is giving attackers access to their targets by enrolling their own multi-factor authentication devices, with the primary goal currently it's financial theft. The threat actors are using local area codes to call organizations, including using things like voice cloning techniques, pretending to be employees in the financial department. They provide stolen ID verification details, including corporate IDs and social security numbers. Using this information and claiming their smartphone is broken, they convince the IT help desk to enroll a new device in MFA under the attacker's control. You know, this story shows how an old spoofing technique is getting better. This is certainly not a new technique, but a lot of new tooling being used to make it harder to identify, things like generated voices. The people at the help desk, they're just trying to do their jobs, but they still, maybe potentially ending up looking like they're at fault. Like that is the point that the attackers are hitting. I'm curious, what can organizations do here, Mike, to keep pace with this type of crime?
So this is actually there's 2 core takeaways that I would get from this. First and foremost, the deep fake used voice. That was pretty amazing if it's actually proven that they actually utilized that in the crime. So that's pretty amazing. The other part that I take away from this is organizations that were laggards and didn't move to BYOD and were still providing devices basically got around this in the same way a system with, an unpatched system basically that has a new vulnerability in the most recent version got by as well. So those are 2 elements from this that positive spin on it, but it's the same as anything else. It's education. It's using other methods of authentication, such as video. It's, training and protocols. But I really think maybe this might, if this picks up and this becomes more, maybe we finally move away from BYOD and it becomes, once again, company issued devices. Maybe BYOD was a phase.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Either the pendulum is swinging, or those that were holding up the pendulum are kind of in the best position. What's old is new again. Maybe we'll start taking the cameras off our smartphones, like the old Blackberries. You would get too as well. Max Tronic in our chat here says that's why we collect retina, fingerprints, and tongue prints for all employees on their first day. Tongue prints.
Those are optional.
Yeah. But it should be pointed out, delicious. Our next story here, CISO breach exposes customers to potential supply chain attacks. That breach that impacted the well-known manufacturer of business analytics software was sufficiently important to prompt a CISA warning and an alert, since it may have exposed hundreds of CISO's customers to a supply chain attack and provided the attacker with a door into the company's customer networks. In addition to CISA's recommendations, cybersecurity researcher Mark Rogers has urged current and former customers to not underestimate the risk posed by this breach. So, Mike, when a ship hits a bridge and destroys it, the whole world becomes aware. At least we get a quality news cycle out of it when we're talking about the fragility of the physical supply chain. but not so much when it's a breach. CISA continues to be doing a good job, doing the yeoman's work of making people aware. But do you feel that alert fatigue may become a threat actor's best weapon?
There's new vulnerabilities every day. There's new criticals. This one's a supply chain one that touches on multiple organizations. So I don't know if it's so much alert fatigue. What's interesting here is one of Sisense's selling points is cybersecurity capabilities that it actually detects. So I'm wondering if they actually detected their own breach, because then this would actually be a win for them. But I sort of suspect that's not what happened.
I mean, we're seeing kind of more is this just a situation where, as an industry, we are becoming, I guess, more comfortable, or like supply chain attacks are now a thing that we are used to dealing with, right? Or at least we know those are an option. They are not an unknown, maybe, where we were at with SolarWinds a couple of years ago.
Well, no, it's third-party risk management, it's supply channel attacks, things along those lines. It's this is where attorneys actually help your cybersecurity program significantly, because you basically tie this into your contracts. So this is how you get ahead of this. This is where the lawyers become part of your extended defensive program.
I think we need an episode of Defense in Depth on that. David Spark, write that down, because that is some good stuff right there. I like that mentality.
Lawyers to the rescue.
Who knew? We have a title too. This is great.
Yeah.
All right, next up here, financial firms lose $12 billion to cyber attacks in 2 decades. That number comes from the International Monetary Fund. They know something about money, and represents losses from 20,000 cyber attacks. The data is contained in its April 2024 Global Financial Stability Report, which also adds that financial organizations are at the receiving end of roughly 1/5 of all cyber attacks. The report spotlights reliance on third-party IT service providers and the rise of AI as primary threats. Mike, personally, if I lost $12 billion, I'd probably be a little bit more upset. I'd be, looking through my pants pockets, or, checking the glove box in my car or something like that. But hey, financial firms, they're in the business of generating money and essentially replacing any other monies that they lose. I'm curious, I guess $12 billion, a lot of money. 2 decades, though, how do we take in this figure from the IMF here?
I think it's part of the cost of doing business. There's always going to be fraud, and it's always a cat and mouse game. So, I'm sure if they average it over the 12 billion, it'd be like peaks and, valleys tied to usage. Financial organizations, highly regulated, they have high investments. This is the reason they're addressing it. This is fraud. Just, it's not like they lost that $12 billion in their couch. It's not like one giant chunk. It's over 20 years. So it's, I'm actually surprised it's not more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, the IMF maybe being conservative here. I mean, is that when we see these kind of reports, this industry hit with certain amount, like after, like to your point, the financial industry particularly used to dealing with fraud, but is that just something that this should just be a data point to, this is the cost of doing business. These are going to be, losses that we take as a matter of course?
Well, as you basically learn how to adapt and improve, and this is where, maturity of security programs over time. I haven't read the report, so I don't know how much of it was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, things along those lines. But security is improving over time. It's a maturing science, maturing art. And, this number, honestly, like I've worked in healthcare and other organizations, and the level of lost money to fraud is significant because of this, because you have to operate from a perspective where you actually have to work with customers, and sometimes your customers aren't your customers. So.
I think the one thing that's interesting from this report is, it's the topic that's on everyone's mind. When we're talking about AI, when we're talking about tools that are used to fool IT, I know it's such a buzzword that it's like saying a word over and over again. It loses all meaning. I do wonder if the concern there is, hey, there are these new tools that will allow things like fraud to be way easier, or potentially or bigger or large, more at scale than we have seen before. If that will have any impact on this, I'm curious what the IMF report, 3-4 years from now will look like in comparison. Again, another data point to add to the actuarial table for loss there.
Well, it's access and markets expanding, and like I said, like the financial organizations understand this. It's not, it's not like they're going under because of this. Banks aren't going under because of these losses. These are all tied to fraudulent credit cards, things along those lines. Yeah. It's theft. It all comes back to fraud. And yes, AI, I'm confident, is the magic panacea that everybody points to solve this problem. But it's like any other investment or improvement in security. It takes time to mature. So
yeah, and And Mike, as you said, CCL points out in our chat here, it would be nice to see a breakdown over the years to see, if this is accelerating, or, if this is maintaining, that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So yeah, context is the key for any of these kind of big scary figures that we see out there. The full IMF report does go into quite some detail, so be sure to check that out in our show notes as well. Next up here, Microsoft exposed internal passwords in security lapse. On February 6th, security researchers notified Microsoft that they had discovered an unsecured Azure cloud storage server containing information relating to Microsoft's Bing search engine, as well as code, scripts, and configuration files containing passwords, keys, and credentials used by Microsoft employees for accessing other internal databases and systems. The storage server was not protected with a password and could be accessed by virtually anyone on the internet, keeping it nice and friendly. Microsoft secured the exposed files on March 5th, but did not say whether it had reset or changed any of the exposed internal credentials. It's also unclear how long the cloud server was exposed online before discovery. So, Mike, there's almost every point in this kind of show where I look over the old metaphorical glasses in a school marmy fashion. I wiggle a finger. This one certainly qualifies. We've said many times in the show, Microsoft is a big target, right? They are dealing with these issues, thousands of issues a day. They're a giant security vendor. They're also a giant security target. This one does sound a little careless. I'm curious what your take on this is.
The article doesn't provide that much detail, but it sort of sounds like there was a binary large object or something where somebody misconfigured it. So one employee, an intern, a developer misconfigures something, which is an example that anybody can do. And now suddenly this entire organization of, hundreds of thousands of people is basically having to deal with this. They're a very large organization with a very large attack surface, and, they make mistakes. What the takeaway from this is if they're making mistakes internally, you have to be very, very vigilant. They're tripping up themselves. You have to basically focus and understand basically the risk. This basically sounds like it was overly exposed credentials, something along those lines, and basically they just got in there. It's Microsoft. I feel like every other week there's some new one. There was one like a week or two ago where CISA, basically went to town basically with the report on their security culture and posture. And it's true. There are so many organizations are dependent upon Microsoft for their operations that I feel like they should be held to a higher standard, almost like a common carrier or something like that. But this article in particular felt a little bit unfair because it was a system that one individual or one team misconfigured. It wasn't indicative of the entire organization, or maybe it is. Maybe that's the culture.
Well, whenever I hear about these kind of misconfiguration things, these come up across any number of companies. I always go back to Jeff Belknap's point, the CISO over at LinkedIn, that security is at its core like a design principle, and I always think of this is a design challenge, right?
Yes.
Like it should. The outcome is never leave this unsecured on the internet, and that
fail closed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that always is the takeaway for me on these.
There was lacking security by design, essentially, to use the modern nomenclature for it, and the fact that even their own internal team can't always follow their own guidance, basically. Do as I say, not as I do.
It's tough for Microsoft. That means it's tough for everybody. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, they're held to a different standard. So.
That's true. All right. Well, before we move on to our next story, we have to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor for today, Vanta. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things can get complicated fast. With Vanta, you can automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more. Vanta's market-leading trust management platform enables you to unify security program management with a built-in risk register and reporting, and streamline security reviews with AI-powered security questionnaires. Over 7,000 fast-growing companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Watch Vanta's on-demand demo at vanta.com/CISO. That's VANTA.com/CISO. Our next story here, hackers using infected devices to hunt for vulnerabilities. Vulnerability scanning has long been a key reconnaissance step for malicious actors looking to deploy cyber attacks. You got to know what's out there before you can attack it, right? However, researchers at Palo Alto Network's Unit 42 say that in 2023, a growing number of threat actors conducted their vulnerability scanning activity from previously compromised devices. The researchers identified vulnerability scanning clusters targeting vulnerabilities in commodity products, things like Ivanti's Connect Secure and Policy Secure solutions, and Progress's Move It Transfer. This malware-based vulnerability scanning tactic allows threat actors to better cover their tracks by bypassing geofencing and to scale their operations by generating higher scan volumes using compromised devices. So, Mike, sounds like an interesting take to get to this attack vector here. I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
This is my favorite one this week. This one I absolutely love. It's don't think of it as a malware actor. Think of it as a vigilante vulnerability management.
Oh. So, okay, I like that. Go on.
So they compromise an endpoint and they basically scan across the organization because the assumption is that endpoint is secure and there might be less defenses internally, less segmentation. This one is a really, really interesting attack path, and then they find other places to move to. It's a common technique used by the adversary, but like the fact that it's actually like sweeping instead of just a targeted vulnerability scan on particular systems is the part that I thought was really, really interesting. Now, I love this one. This one is my favorite one this week.
It almost, this feels like, hey, we know how to do botnets, right? Like really well. Like what if, but what if instead of DDoSes, we found something that's way more valuable to do with all of these devices that we're enrolling here?
Well, it's a lot of organizations they still have that perimeter-based defenses, basically things internally. They believe that it's secure. So like once you get past that, this is what this is. This is where you have to operate from an assumed breach perspective, every single endpoint, every single device. But on organizations with flat networks, like how would you see this? You may not even have internal sensors unless it accidentally crosses some other device that it hits with some endpoint protection. No, it's interesting. Like if they can do this like low and slow without actually escalating to that point, that's also super interesting. This is absolutely my favorite one this week. So.
Yeah, it's you never want it to happen to you, but like it is fascinating to see like what they're using their tooling, right, to the best of their ability, and the creativity to find that is fascinating to watch kind of that thought process, and reveals some new security challenges. Hey, don't set up that hard perimeter. Come on.
Well, there's some of the remote management tools actually have scanners that run off of the endpoints. The bad guys are just doing what's in the professional services, like Tanium does this, but it does it on purpose. So that's what that's what I love about this. So,
all right, next story here: over 90,000 LG Smart TVs exposed to remote attacks. Security researchers have discovered 4 vulnerabilities impacting multiple versions of the operating system used in LG Smart TVs. The flaws in LG's WebOS enable authorization bypass, privilege escalation, and command injection. Exploiting these flaws could allow a threat actor to take control of services on the device, pivot to more sensitive devices connected to the same network, or enlist devices into malware botnets or crypto mining schemes. Shodan Internet scans have identified 91,000 exposed or potentially vulnerable devices. Though LG TVs alert users when important WebOS updates are available, they can be postponed indefinitely. That seems like a problematic feature. So, Mike, here's another opportunity for a significant threat to fly under the radar. The average consumer not making the connection between a smart TV placed on the network where all your sensitive data is. Is this as bad as it sounds?
It's not good. It's definitely not good. Well, this is bad for places like like hospitals or where televisions are basically put into a public space and basically maybe not put on a guest network. This is what I would actually worry about. This, like, how often do people, like, obviously security people update their televisions all the time, but my parents don't. The dialog box comes up, they hit no, and that vulnerability is going to be there forever. This would be an amazing method of persistence inside of a network, because how are you going to catch this? You're only going to catch it through like network traffic. So thank you, LG.
Yes, and maybe only let people decline the software update for so long. I know actually this has been a whole thing with Roku, actually, with all things, but that's with terms of service and stuff like that. So I see both sides of it, right? As a consumer device, you don't want functionality to change, and there's all sorts of weird licensing with smart TVs. But on the other hand, security is probably not something you should be able to opt out of, right?
It should absolutely update for you like at 2 a.m. and you shouldn't even like know about it. Like, why are they even like, you should actively go in there to disable this, because most consumers won't. It should fail closed.
All right, moving on. We have our last story for today here. Chipmaker says Taiwan earthquake will affect its DRAM supply. Micron Technology stated yesterday that the April 3rd earthquake in Taiwan will hurt a calendar quarter of its dynamic random access memory supply. You know it is DRAM. With 4 locations in Taiwan, the company has a disproportionate role in the global chip supply chain. Chips that are used, all over the place. Data centers, personal computers, smartphones, you name it, DRAM's in there. However, despite not being at full production numbers at present, the company said there would be no impact in its long-term DRAM supply capability. So, Mike, a bit of a non-story here in one way, being a small disruption in the company's manufacturing schedule, but much like that time that container ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, and with the CISO story that we were covering earlier, it just shows how dependent the world is on a healthy supply chain. I'm curious what the story got you thinking of.
Well, it got me thinking about how important Taiwan is to the global economy. This is, if there was ever a conflict, like this is a little bit of a preview right here.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about Micron. They have global fab, facilities everywhere, inside of Asia as well. NAND wasn't impacted, just DRAM, and DRAM is a bit of a commodity now. So there's other places to purchase it. And Micron's one of the 4 leading memory producers that are left. But the NAND would be more important if this impacted NAND production, then I'd actually be worried about where this is going. But this went under the radar. This wasn't a bridge in Baltimore. This wasn't the Suez Canal. Yeah.
Well, and I also think with things like this, I mean, we've just come out of a multi-year global, chip crisis everywhere. I have to think that organizations, if they haven't implemented some way of hardening that supply and accounting for disruptions like this over time, they're clearly not learning their lesson. So that may have also, I think played a factor as well. And we're seeing this with, kind of the diversity of, just everyone wanting to nationalize chip production as well. I mean, that's a whole other part of that too.
Yeah, no, and that if anything, this reaffirms that as well. Near shoring, basically friend shoring, basically of those new fabrication plants, the ones they're making in Arizona. This reaffirms that strategy.
All right, Mike, before we get out of here, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller? I have a feeling where you basically already said which one's your favorite, but remind everybody here.
The vigilante vulnerability management, that one was definitely a thumbs up. I always love seeing new tradecraft, and that one is particularly enjoyable.
And you've got a fan in your phraseology in CCL in our chat. He was he was enjoying that one. So as was I. Before we get out of here, Mike, as well, where can people find you online? Should we send them your way on LinkedIn?
You can find me connected to an LG TV for vulnerability. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk cybersecurity with folks, learn and network. So this is a passion. I love it. I love doing this. This is something I'm always happy to talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime about.
Well, Mike Levin, the Deputy CISO at 3M. We loved having you on the show. Your passion was coming through. This was a lot of fun, and we really appreciate you making the time to be here today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right, and thanks also to our sponsor, Vanta, compliance that doesn't sock too much. And thanks to our audience today. We can't get to every single comment. I need to assure everyone I am not a deep fake today. I was on the wrong side of the screen, evidently. There was some concern, not a deep fake. I am the real person. I know a deep fake would say that. But thanks to CCL, to Kevin Farrell for showing up. Better late than never. David Cross, everybody in our chat. Really appreciate everybody getting in there and having some fun. And remember, if you're not catching us live, 3:30 every single Friday, p.m. Eastern, that is, every single Friday, and you can find us. Get in on the chat. We would love to have you. Come back and join us next week for that Week in Review show. And remember, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes, and we'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.